He wrote a book called Kitab al-Mawdu'at, the book regarding fabricated ahadith. And he was very strict. It's one of the things that the scholars mention about him, that he was very strict. In theology, he was also very harsh, with the exception of in one area. Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, believed, because there is a difference of opinion, is a peripheral issue, the licitness of ta'wil in discussing theology concerning the names and attributes of Allah. That started a huge firestorm, because Sheikh Abdul Qadir Al-Jilani and the other ulama had already made it very clear that it mustn't be used and it's not licit. He said that it was. And when they said to him, how can you differ with your teacher? This is Shaykh al-Islam, this is who he is. He said, well, I differ with him. And people weren't ready to listen to that in Baghdad. If you differed with Sheikh Abdul Qadir Al-Jilani, this is how it was said by the ulama in that time. Whoever's creed is different to Sheikh Abdul Qadir Al-Jilani, he's one of the people of bid'ah. If you differed with him, I'm not talking fundamentals, branch issues. If you differed with him in a branch issue, people can say that you were one of Ahlul Bid'ah. You must be from one of the cults. That's how heavy, that's how high of regard Sheikh Abdul Qadir Al-Jilani was held in. You couldn't say anything about the man. But Imam Ibn Jawzi, rahimahullah, he said, no, I differ with him in this issue. He was arrested. The door to his house was sealed shut, so he couldn't get in. And he was exiled to Wasit for about 5 years. He came back after those 5 years, said nothing further on the topic. Imam Muwaffaq ad-Din rahimahullah said about him, because he was a classmate of Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi, he said, I never found a man more knowledgeable in matters of fiqh or creed than him. He said, we just differed with him in some of the matters that he mentioned regarding the creed. Some of the matters. He was a tremendous alim. His description is very fair, long brown beard, and deep set sunken brown eyes, so that when he looked at you, it was like he was looking through you. He pierced through you when he looked at you. So few people could hold his gaze, because he had a very strong, piercing sight. Whenever he published his books, because back then, when you wanted to publish a book, you would write it out, and then you'd have copies made, written out by other people. It's before the printing press. And then you would have them put up in the maktab or the local bookstore. And people would say, oh, Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi, he's written a new book. And there would start to be discussions over who's going to buy it first. And someone would try to buy the first copy because it would be signed. Or he would sign it with his quill. So they'd try to get the first copies, and then they'd read it. And then if there was a discussion on another topic, or he was discussing, like, for example, he and Imam Muwaffaq ad-Din got into a big battle. And that was, the bookstore was empty of their books because it was so popular. Because these were two of the premier scholars, because Imam Muwaffaq ad-Din was shuttling back and forth to Baghdad. Imam Muwaffaq ad-Din at that time was younger than Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi. And he was differing with Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi in some periphery issues of creed. Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi said, my answer is simple. This man is young enough to be one of my students. Who is he to differ with me in this regard? Because Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi was well established among the ulama. Imam Muwaffaq ad-Din al-Qadam, rahimahullah, as big as he was Shaykh al-Islam, but he was still younger than him, and he was still establishing himself. So Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi said, he's young enough to be my student. Who is he to speak to me? That shows the strength, the caliber that the ulama had. And Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi did not censure him or rebuke him for that statement. But they differed on these points. And so there were books written in response to it. And one of the books written after the death of Imam Al-Jawzi was the Dhamm Ta'wil, the blameworthy nature of all Ta'wil. It was written by Imam Muwaffaq ad-Din as an attack on all forms of interpretation and the issues of the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All for just closing the door. Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi, before he had died, he wrote the book Dafa' Shubhat Tashbih, negating and pushing away all likenesses to Allah and affirming Allah's glory and his being different to his creation. And in that book, he went against all of his teachers in this issue. Sheikh Abdul Qadir Al-Jilani, Ibn Nasir Al-Zaghuni, Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la the younger, Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la the elder. Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la the elder is the one that brought the ulama, but he differed with him. And he got death threats for that. But that shows the ulama at his level, when they differ, they have that levity to do that. But he put himself in a lot of danger. Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la the elder, he had hundreds of students. His memory was still well established and alive. His grave then as now is a mashhad. That's a place you visit when you believe your dua is going to get granted. He's not like your local village imam or the local imam that's in our city here. This is one of the ulama. When we say imam about Imam Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la, it's not with the lowercase I. It's with a capital I. He's not a biologist or a local philosopher or anything like us. We happen to, work down at our local college, and every now and then on the weekends he teaches a bit of Qur'an. No, these are the ulama of the ummah. The nubala, the stars of this ummah. So, Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi rahimahullah writes these 1,000 books. Right? Writes these 1,000 books. 194 of which have been printed and distributed globally to date. I've already mentioned that he had some issues for some of the theological positions that he's taken. Finally, we come to his book, ul-Masir Fi Ilm it-Tafsir. Okay. In this commentary, Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi rahimahullah seeks to introduce the reader to the commentary of the Qur'an in a systematic yet concise fashion. Often, what Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi rahimahullah, what he does, because he's the type of preacher that used to preach in a very an affected fashion, what was called hakawati. A lot of the Shamis, they still do it, where the sheikh, he will speak on a point, and then he will raise the point to its epitome, and then he will end. And he expects people, Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah, Subhanallah. And people to say, Allahu Akbar, and things like this. And there was a man he used to sit next to, Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi rahimahullah used to really love that man. And that man would always say, whenever he would finish a really important statement, he'd say, Subhanallah. And everyone in the room, Allahu Akbar. And one day that man was ill, he wasn't there. And when he saw him the following day, Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi rahimahullah, he said, I missed you and your salutations. Because sometimes the speaker, some speakers, it's part of their speech, how they speak, and that helps spur them on. So say Sheikh Muhammad Fuad al-Barazi, that's the way he speaks, is hakawati. So when he first came and he was speaking, and he's in a room and there's all these Muslim brothers that are from the Indian subcontinent, Central Asia, and it's deadpan quiet. You can't even hear grasshoppers rubbing their legs together. And he asked the translator, he said, are these people dead? What's going on here? So the translator, he started doing it, subhanallah, just to keep the flow of the dialogue going, so to keep it alive, because these Muslim brothers think, what's going on here? It's not a mahfil, he's just giving a dars and hadith. He's not supposed to be saying subhanallah and yelling out loud and these type of things, and and holding on to the collar of your shirt, subhanallah, right? Once Imam Abdul Qadir Al-Jilani rahimahullah, he gave a lecture and he finished it by saying, and the true slave of Allah, knowing himself, knows Allah, and that helps to protect him against the haram. Imam Al-Jawzi jumped up and said, subhanallah, and he tore his shirt. And then he realized later, he said, this was one of my most expensive ones. But this is part of that style of certain scholars. They like it quiet, certain they like it loud, certain ones they like to have crowd participation back and forth. And Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi was one of those ones who liked crowd participation. Finally, in ending all of this off, his lectures were attended sometimes, his weekly lectures were sometimes attended by between 50 and 100,000 people at a time. Massive masjid. Massive masjid. His durus on hadith were legendary. Legendary durus on hadith. Where few people could get next to him in hadith. His knowledge of things. He is the type of alim, certain ulama, you can read their books and anyone can read them. Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi is the type of scholar where if he writes a book in or writes books in ahadith, you have to read all of the books to fully understand him, because he speaks in the language of the scholar. When you look at Imam Muwafiq al-Din, Abdul Ghani, Abdul Wahid al-Maqdisi, they're able to take things, shrink it down for the common person and make it understandable and usable. Imam Ibn al-Jawzi is here, and he thinks that everyone can come up the stairs and get to him. And so it takes someone else to go through other details to expose who he is to the world. So he's speaking in the language of the ulama. He's there. But he does not expect to tone his language down. He keeps it where it is. He died in 597 AH. Some reports have 596. The Imam was buried near Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah. He left behind 3 boys and 3 girls. And we now present to you the text, ul-Masir Fi Ilm it-Tafsir. Next week, I will want to start in earnest on the tafsir. And I will want us to come together and to start to benefit one another with this tafsir. أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم أستغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم يرحم الراحمين. Is there any question over our introductory remarks? I had believed that we might be able to get to it today, but the introductory remarks had to be explained in some depth. Is there any question over what we've covered today in our introductory remarks? Any question? Yes?
Could you just get a repetition of the issue that in the Jawzi had with in terms of the creed? What was it that he tried to explain that you said?
Okay. Question is regarding what the issue was that Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi differed with his teachers on regarding creed. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. It had to do with the licitness of interpretation when discussing the names and attributes of Allah. I'll give you one ayah as an example. بَلْ يَدَاهُ مَبْسُوطَتَانِ. But indeed Allah has 2 hands outspread. Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th surah, ayah 64. Hanbalis, Ahmad ibn Hanbal says, Allah has an attribute called hand. That's the end of his statement. It's literally the end of the statement. All the scholars after say, Allah has an attribute called hand, yad. Nothing. Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi says, this is what this means. However, it could also be referring to, and this is where the battle began. And lo and behold, he was accused of sounding like an Ash'ari, and that's where things started from there. Because they know, because those are the only people that advise, this man is philosophical, he sounds like an Ash'ari, and persecution started. Because they're the only ones that resort to ilm al-kalam and other things, and he said, I didn't resort to any ilm al-kalam. I'm using the ayat of the Qur'an. No, only they use these type of words, that's it, we've got to stop him. And they immediately put the brakes on him.
So when we interpret Imam Ahmad's translation of the hand, do we put that into context with the other ayah? There's nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier on, and therefore we don't explain it.
That's it. We just leave it. We just leave it. That's why when you look at the ayah, Laysa kamithlihi shay wa huwa as-sami'ul basir. There's no thing like him. Heart wiped clean. No suppositions, nothing. He is all hearing, all seeing. Good. So you wouldn't therefore ask after that, well, wait a minute, hold on. If he's all hearing, all seeing, that means he's got to have, no, because your heart's just been wiped clean with, there's nothing like him. So if you start to say, well, Allah is like, or what about that, then obviously your heart hasn't been wiped clean with the first part of the ayah. It's got to be wiped clean with that first part, and the second part comes in.
What about explaining the word hand, using the word hand, and then using words to explain that, as in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power is this or that?
That's what got Imam Ibn Al-Jawzi in trouble, this discussion of using yad with quwwah, or yad with ni'mah. Because the Hanabila are saying, ni'matullahi wahida, the ni'mah of Allah is one. So how can you say that yadain in this passage means this? And then the Hanbalis, they go one further, because they said, by you interpreting, because ta'wil is taking something from one meaning to another. And the Hanabila are saying, by doing that, you are assuming you know the meaning of this ayah. And you don't. And that's where the battle began. So Ibn Al-Jawzi, after that, he wrote another book to clarify his position called Kitab Akhbar al-Sifat, which was an expanded, about 300-page work to say, I have no problem with the imam of my school. I'm well within the parameters of my school. However,